So the stats for HMS Shannon, the British frigate in this combat, is a hull value number, which is double the real ship's mass, of 2,130. The PVN, less important, is kind of similar for both these ships in the duel. The crew was 330 men. She has a SVN, and that's the sail value number, where she will lose a sail, as I've explained in another video, is 164. GDN, the gun damage number, and that's where she's going to lose a cannon, is 41. She has a turning point, maximum turning point of 8. And for this duel, since Brooke trained his crew so well, she has a national gunnery modifier of 1.14. Her broadside, so one side of the ship firing, is 14 18-pounder long guns, 8 32-pounder carronades, and 2 9-pounder guns, or maybe one if she's using the bow chasers. For the aft, I found some source saying that she had 2 12-pounder carronades for the stern, so we have a stern ornament here. We'll see. I'm not sure this is entirely correct, but that is the setup of this 5th-rate frigate of the British Navy under the command of Captain Brooke. She will be sailing into this battle with an experienced crew, and so will the Chesapeake. They both have experienced crew. There is a little bit of a thing where some people are saying that the Chesapeake didn't have a very trained crew. I find that not entirely true. And here we have Björn, my friend, who's going to be playing the Captain Brooke for this battle using the Shannon. Let's see what he says.
Hi, I am Captain Brooke, and I'm going to board Chesapeake this afternoon and take her to some port.
Halifax Harbor.
Halifax Harbor, thank you. And yeah, hope this will work out well.
Excellent. The USS Chesapeake is one of the original 6 frigates that were ordered by the fledgling United States Navy. And for all intents and purposes, she was a lot lighter. She was a much smaller frigate than, for instance, Constitution, but she still had that sturdier frame, I suppose, and so we're counting her as a 4th-rate frigate. She's slightly larger, and her hull value number is 2,270. She had a crew of 379. The sail value number is 174, slightly more than the Shannon. The gun damage number, so the number reached each time where she loses a gun, is 45. She has 7 turning points, and the national gunnery modifier for Lauren's crew, we've decided to have that at 1.0. So there's a slight gunnery advantage for the Shannon, which would be corresponding with the historical accounts. She'd be a slightly slower sailor for this engagement. Maybe this is wrong, but that's the feeling I get from reading some of the source material. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd say that she would be a little bit slower sailor than the 5th-rate Shannon. Her broadside, so one side of the ship, is 14 18-pounder long guns and 10 32-pounder carronades. She also have a 4 ornament of 2 12-pound guns, long guns, and an aft ornament of 1 12-pounder carronades. And we decided for the battle also to use, as you can see here in the little note, gun crews. So each gun needs to be armed with a crew, and if you lose the gun, we will be rolling a die and deciding how many of that gun crew that actually fell when the gun got taken out. So if it's an 8-person crew, you'll be rolling a T8, 8-sided dice, and if it's an 8, you lose the whole crew, 8 of them. And if it's a 1, you'll just lose 1 crew. And this turned out pretty nice when we were running the battle. So some of the crew getting taken out when the guns were lost. So slowly the crew went down, and since we also had a certain number needed for actually sailing the ship, you started to, at the end of the battle here, to think about were you sailing the ship or were you aiming, arming the guns or firing the guns. So very interesting how these rules work out. So that would be recorded in the crew damage section. And you have the hull damage section where we record and you see the numbers, that's the amount of damage taken at what turn. We also use the rule finally where some of the shot, even if we were both the players, I was actually a player in this battle, were firing low, some of the shot would end up in the sails anyway, on the longer distance. So when they were firing at longer distances, some of the shot would end up higher up in the rigging and the sails. So that's also recorded as sail damage. There were not very much sail damage done during the battle since no one specifically aimed at the sails, but some damage. So pretty well corresponding here. So now here follows a little bit of historical information about the actual battle, and then a short text-to-speech where there's an actual letter. I didn't feel like I should be reading that, so I actually used text-to-speech for that part. I hope you guys are okay with that. But here follows the historical section. On June the 1st, 1813, the frigate USS Chesapeake and the HMS Shannon clashed off Boston Harbor in one of the War of 1812's most dramatic naval duels. Captain James Lawrence had just taken command of the Chesapeake and sailed out to beat HMS Shannon, commanded by Captain Philip Brooke, who had been patiently blockading Boston for weeks, hoping to provoke just such a confrontation. The Chesapeake was well armed and carried a larger crew. Her men were trained and tested, but somewhat unfamiliar with each other, some having recently come aboard. In contrast, Shannon's crew had been rigorously trained under Brooke, who emphasized gunnery and ship handling. He drilled his men relentlessly and even fine-tuned the alignment of each cannon, ensuing pinpoint accuracy in battle. When the ships met, Shannon fired with deadly precision, disabling the Chesapeake's steering and rigging in the opening minutes. Despite fierce resistance, including the famous final command of the mortally wounded Lawrence, "Don't give up the ship," British sailors boarded and captured the American frigate in under 15 minutes. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, and Captain Brooke himself was grievously wounded in hand-to-hand combat. What makes this battle even more compelling is the letter that Captain Brooke sent to Lawrence just before the fight. In it, he challenged him to a fair ship-to-ship duel outside the harbor, offering terms that avoided unnecessary bloodshed and interference. Lawrence never officially replied, and most think the letter was never received. Whatever the case, the Chesapeake sailed out and they had their duel. The letter, a rare example of chivalry amid war, adds a layer of tragic honor to an already legendary encounter at sea. And here I will be using text to voice to read up the entire letter, because I think it's a nice setup for our little encounter between those ships, the two ships, using beat-to-quarter rule set.
Sir, as the Chesapeake appears now ready for sea, I request that you will do me the favor to meet the Shannon with her, ship to ship, to try the fortune of our respective flags. To an officer of your character, it requires some apology to proceed to further particulars. Be assured, sir, that it is not from any doubt I can entertain of your wishing to close with my proposal, but merely to provide an answer to any objection which might be made, and very reasonably, upon the chance of our receiving unfair support. After the diligent attention which we had paid to Commodore Rogers, the pains I took to detach all force but the Shannon and Tenedos to such a distance that they could not possibly join in any action fought in sight of the Capes, and the various verbal messages which had been sent into Boston to that effect, we were much disappointed to find the Commodore had eluded us by sailing on the first change, after the prevailing easterly winds had obliged us to keep an offing from the coast. He, perhaps, wished for some stronger assurance of a fair meeting. I am therefore induced to address you more particularly, and to assure you that what I write, I pledge my honor to perform to the utmost of my power. The Shannon mounts 24 guns upon her broadside and 1 light boat gun 18-pounders upon her main deck, and 32-pound carronades on her quarterdeck and forecastle, and is manned with a complement of 300 men and boys, a large proportion of the latter, besides 30 seamen, boys, and passengers who were taken out of recaptured vessels lately. I am thus minute because a report has prevailed in some of the Boston papers that we had 150 men additional lent us from La Hogue, which really never was the case. La Hogue is now gone to Halifax for provisions, and I will send all other ships beyond the power of interfering with us, and meet you wherever it is most agreeable to you, within the limits of the undermentioned rendezvous, viz. From 6 to 10 leagues east of Cape Cod Lighthouse, from 8 to 10 leagues east of Cape Anne's Light, on Cache Sledge, in latitude 43 north, at any bearing and distance you please to fix, off the south breakers of Nantucket, or the shoal on St. George's Bank. If you will favor me with any plan of signals or telegraph, I will warn you, if sailing under this promise, should any of my friends be too nigh, or anywhere in sight, until I can detach them out of my way, or I would sail with you under a flag of truce, to any place you think safest from our cruisers, hauling it down when fair to begin hostilities. You must, sir, be aware that my proposals are highly advantageous to you, as you cannot proceed to sea singly in the Chesapeake without imminent risk of being crushed by the superior force of the numerous British squadrons which are now abroad, where all your efforts, in case of a rencontre, would, however gallant, be perfectly hopeless. I entreat you, sir, not to imagine that I am urged by mere personal vanity to the wish of meeting the Chesapeake, or that I depend only upon your personal ambition for your acceding to this invitation. We both have nobler motives. You will feel it as a compliment if I say that the result of our meeting may be the most grateful service I can render to my country, and, I doubt not, that you, equally confident of success, will feel that it is only by repeated triumphs, in even combats, that your little navy can now hope to console your country for the loss of that trade it can no longer protect. Favor me with a speedy reply. We are short of provisions and water, and cannot stay long here. I have the honor to be, etc. He added a note, N.B. For the general service of watching your coast it is requisite for me to keep another ship in company to support me with her guns and boats, when employed near the land, and particularly to aid each other if either ship, in chase, should get on shore. You must be aware that I cannot, consistent with my duty, waive so great an advantage for this general service by detaching my consort without an assurance on your part of meeting me directly, and that you will neither seek nor admit aid from any other of your armed vessels if I dispatch mine expressly for the sake of meeting you. Should any special order restrain you from thus answering a formal challenge, you may yet oblige me by keeping my proposal a secret, and appointing any place you like to meet us, within 300 miles of Boston, in a given number of days after you sail, as unless you agree to an interview, I may be busied on some other service, and perhaps be at a distance from Boston when you get to sea. Choose your terms, but let us meet.
So this is the setup for the battle. We tried to find some historical sources for it. Wind blowing to the southeast is what I found, and that both ships were traveling eastward, and the Chesapeake had the weather gauge. So slight advantage as far as that goes for the Chesapeake at the beginning of this battle. So this is set up, and the Chesapeake is played by my friend Marcus, who I also fence with, and Björn is playing the Shannon, and I also fence with him. So little bit of a damage to the bowsprit here, that it was a human error initially. And the whole battle starts up, they planned out turn one here, and the whole thing starts up with the Shannon opening up with her first initial broadside. Since the crews are experienced, they have initial broadside, and here you can see the whole dice roll that is needed for the firing procedure, and also the modifier for range. We don't do this. Since I made this calculator, all you need to do is mount in the data and you press calculate. So 223 points of damage is very decent initial broadside. Partly why it hit that hard is because it's an initial broadside, so you will get an additional 50 to the die roll of a T100 for your initial broadside, so you'll be hitting a little bit harder, or very much harder, for the initial broadside. These are the plans that they made during the battle, so just scribbles for themselves. Some of the turns were divided into these phases, the 5 phases. Some of the turns they played just like one entire turn. But even when we play entire turns, it turns out that we're kind of facing things, like you're deciding if you're going to be firing early or you'll be firing late in the turn. So that's how that worked out. The cameras didn't do what I wanted for this one, so the filming might be a little bit worse than normal. I was hoping for better, but I messed up, so one camera is not available. So we're just gonna have to do with the footage from one camera, and the phone, the photos I took with my cell phone. Here you have the measuring that you do once per turn. You're allowed to measure your point of sail, or point towards the wind. And you do that with that special device that are for the game. Looks kind of like this. So you'll have the arrow pointing at the wind, where the wind is coming from, and you'll have the little tab on the front of the ship, and then you'll find out what point of sail you have. So both ships are doing pretty well here in the beginning, because they're both having the wind at their backs. So either they're quarter running, like the Shannon here, and the Chesapeake is running before the wind. So you can see those all stop, quarter reaching, running, reaching, beating, and then stopped. And it's slightly different, as I probably mentioned in an earlier video, if you are fore and aft rigged. Then you can sail a little bit closer to the wind. Wind doesn't change every turn. There's no chance in this game, like in Warlord games, Black Sea, so every 10 turns. Here in turn 2, the Chesapeake decides to respond to the Shannon's initial broadside with a broadside overhaul, and Marcus has lined his ship up, and the calculated damage here is 142.63, so we'll round that up to 143 points of damage. Some of that, as I mentioned earlier, would end up hitting the sails and the rigging. And they've already at this point lost some guns. Like, remember, round 45 for both ships. Each time you hit 45 points of damage to the hull, you lose a gun on that side. Shannon responding with another broadside at pretty close range here. On the Chesapeake, dice roll is horrid, or for being that close, pretty bad with all those guns. Still doing 194 points of damage. So quite respectable of that. Both these ships are very well armed with those 18-pounder long guns and all those 32-pounder carronades. They are going to do quite a bit of damage when they get close to each other. And then maneuvering at the same time, trying to get in position. So here at the beginning of turn 3, you'll see that the Shannon has ended up trying to cut behind the Shannon, the Chesapeake, and maybe deliver her a stern rake to her. This turns out that doesn't happen, since you need to plan the turn in advance when you're playing. Then you never really know what the opponent is planning. You're going to have to guess what the opponent is planning, but things just play out. And here Björn is trying the stern chasers, and those were the 12-pounder carronades, and they do a meekly 6.37 of damage, so almost nothing. But at least he tried them. And all the guns, like the bow chasers, the stern guns, and the broadsides, they all have that 3-degree arc of fire. So that is a difference from if you're used to other systems. Many other systems will just have a straight line from the broadside. And in this game you have that 30-degree angle where the guns can be like tilted forward and back. Which I like. I think that's kind of historical. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd say they'd be able to somewhat align the guns like that. And another thing that is really nice with bitter quarters, now we've played it a few times, and this is the first time we're playing it with bigger ships, where we slowly built up the size of the ships, is the amount of definition you get in every part of this battle. So the ornament is actually based on the real ornament of the ship. It's not just heavy guns, light guns, carronades. You have the actual poundage of the guns playing a role. and the nationality of the crew, the training of the crew, it all plays a role. The sailing of the ship, and so on. So all the people that has tried it, now we're just actually 3 that have tried it, and a 4th person that have been listening in a bit. But everyone agrees that it is a lot of fun. It takes a long time. This is not a system where I would really want to do a fleet action unless I had somewhere where I could leave the game board up and for days, because it would take a very long time to play a game with many ships. Even if there is some more simplified version of the beta quarter rules in the rule set, still, if you want to do a battle with many ships, you will be playing for a very long time. Here, the Chesapeake is trying its boat chasers you can see it measuring with those clear rulers. That's been a really good idea with the clear rulers, doing also a very weak amount of damage, 7 points of damage to the hull and tiny bit to the rigging at that distance. But it just really feels nice how the ships handle. As I mentioned before, the actual system has been written for another scale of ship, 1 to 1200 scale ships, but it turns out it plays out really nicely at 1/700 scale. I mean, for us it works really nice. Maybe if you guys give a try of the rules, you come up with something else that you feel different about, but I can only just recommend it, because so far it's like we said, it's been working out great for us. And also we've moved forward a bit, so we're in turn 5 and moving into turn 6 here, and you have the Chesapeake actually in chase. So she's at this point chasing the Shannon, and then Shannon is kind of letting the wind out of her sails here on turn 6, and we'll have a pretty close fought action, and you'll see how much damage these ships actually can do with just one single broadside, because they end up really close to each other. It's not point blank range, but it is a close range broadside with all the guns, including the carronades. The carronades, different calibers of carronades, and I have the tables in here in the video, so you can find that at some point if you like. You'll see this, both the ships here. The Chesapeake doing 447 and the Shannon doing 406 damage, so that's quite significant. At this point also what happens is that since when you lose one of your surrender points, for each 5% of hull damage that you get, you lose the surrender point. You have 10 from the beginning, unless the ships are unevenly matched, then you might have less. But as you lose 5% hull, then you'll also lose one of your surrender points, and then each time you lose a surrender point, you need to roll on the critical hit table. And actually what happens here is that the Shannon's rudder is damaged. We've changed the table that I showed here a tiny bit, so that actually on a 1 a fire is started on board as well, because we didn't find that in the original. There's fire and fire ships, but not fire started by gunfire, so we just wanted to add that in. Maybe, I don't know if it's historically correct, but we just wanted that, something striking a spark. So on a 1 the ship catches fire, 2, 3 the rudder is broken, and on I think it's 4, 5, 6, you'll have to look at the table, the wheel is broken. But here the rudder is broken, and we forgot to count it, because you actually lose 2 of your surrender points if your rudder is broken, and we forgot to count that. So if you would have counted that in, and we didn't, then it would actually have been a win for the Chesapeake. So at the end, even now as we play it to the end, it's a win for the Shannon, because no one thought about looking at that part of the rules. I guess we'll call it a draw or something. But if we would have remembered to count that in, then the Shannon would have struck a little bit earlier than when the Chesapeake struck at the end here. So So they're trying to maneuver on each other, still getting pretty close, and there is still a couple of broadsides being exchanged. I mean, it plays out kind of like the real duel, I think. There was no boarding in our battle. They didn't get that close, or they didn't decide to board. Even though Björn, I think he was planning it from the beginning, he probably forgot in the heat of the moment. So they were playing it and firing on each other and having a good time testing out the system. Here we have the roll. It's Marcus firing with the Chesapeake, doing 240, which is a respectable broadside. At this point you have to remember they've lost a lot of guns. We will look at those tables at the end here. You will see how many guns they actually lost on each broadside. There's quite an amount of guns lost. And here the Shannon is responding with a broadside of her own and doing 108 damage. So slightly less. Very pleased, both these models are by me, and they're actually of the actual ships, and I used hull from Terminator's of the actual ships. Not for the Chesapeake, actually I just used a 38 gun US frigate hull. That's not specifically for the Chesapeake, I guess, but she was a 38 gun US ship, right? So I'm not sure, it's probably not the hull from the Chesapeake, but it turns out it works out really nice as the Chesapeake. And I added that free trade and sailors' right flag or banner that she was using for. It's not really an ensign, is it? So that she was using for this fight. She also had 3 ensigns up, so 3 flags, American flags up, 3 ensigns, and I tried to represent them as well as the commissioning pennant. Whereas the Chesapeake, or the Shannon, she just had the 1 ensign and the commissioning pennant at the main, if the source I read is correct. Also, I've chosen to have those lines further down because I found some sources saying that is actually the way they look. That is not typical for any of those countries at this point, with the streak being below the gun ports. But I also found historical paintings that has this, and then also descriptions. So I just chose to represent them this way for this battle. And they're still maneuvering, trying to get the fire in. I think the maneuvering wise, Marcus was doing pretty good here at the end. However, he had taken more damage, and since we forgot to count the rudder hit here, he is closer to striking. And there's no roll for striking in this game, bit to quarters. If you reach the last of your surrender points, you'll automatically strike. And this is what ends up happening at the end of this battle. We use this, I'm gonna get to that eventually here, since I'm still waiting for it from the States, the actual wires and stuff that I need to make another one of those gun smoke effects. Once I have that, I make a longer video with how you make some of that of your own. As you can see here in the battle, even if this is sped up and it's glowing much faster, it's looking really nice, I think. It adds a lot of immersion with having that gunfire. I would probably make it even denser if I make new ones. I would probably have even more of the little glimmer diodes in there, and I would probably put them tighter together to make it look more like a tighter broadside with more guns firing. But they really work. They really add a dimension to your otherwise pretty, I mean, there's not, to be honest, I mean, so much action when you're playing a board game, right? But it's gonna have to be in your head, the action. Also, what you're missing out on some when I'm filming like this, but you can also see it here in the background, is all the papers you have and the stuff that you use for the stats and so on. So this is a situation with the Chesapeake somewhat at the stern. There wasn't the bow rack there. It was just gunfire at the stern part of the Shannon by the Chesapeake. We are on turn 9, and the ships are still maneuvering, trying to figure out a way to outsmart each other and deciding when to fire and so on. And on turn 9 they'll end up firing together, if I don't remember it wrong. Again, these rulers, really good. I recommend. We're actually trying to get some of those rulers with the inch measurements as well, because it's just so much easier when you're going to measure the distance for a gunnery. You can just measure on top of the ship and you can see through the actual ruler. Here you see they're rolling at the same time using. Maybe if you like dice, you wouldn't use that, but I'd be happy to share that with you. I might even put a link to it here, the latest version of this gunnery calculator. It allows for you to shoot 3 different ranks of guns. So you could shoot your long guns, your carronades, and maybe if you have some smaller long guns also on your broadside there. I could make a version with more. Just to make it fit nicely in a cell phone. Then 3 gun rows was what I wanted in there. I've changed it again so that the initial broadside shows off better as well, so it's easier to select that. And that it's calculated correctly. On turn 10, what happens is, because you're rolling for wind, the wind is staying the same. It's still a gentle breeze, like in history, but it's now turned 4 degrees, and it's now blowing to the south. So turn 4 degrees to the right, and then blowing to the south. So that changed the situation a bit. I mean, there is no whoever has the weather gauge goes first and so on in this game, but there's still, as in reality, an advantage to have the weather gauge, because you have more room to maneuver, right? You have the wind on your side of the engagement. So also, you don't see it in these videos, but we're always playing a bit of music in the background and getting the atmosphere right and so on, and talking a lot and having a lot of fun together. I'm very pleased that I have friends that I can do these things with, so I wouldn't just be alone with this thing, but that I actually can, that I have friends that wants to do this with me and want to try out. And for this one I could just focus on helping with the rules and filming the actual battle, and then they were actually playing it, and I recommend it. It's actually a lot of fun also to watch these battles play out. And this is the final broadside of the game, and it's the Shannon who fires broadside at close range on the Chesapeake, and that took her last surrender point. But as I said earlier, if we would have remembered to count the 2 surrender points lost for the Shannon losing its rudder, or not losing it, but damaging its rudder, then it would have been a 1 for the USS Chesapeake. And so here you have the final standings, and also what happened during the round. So you can see on round 1, the only damage done was to the Chesapeake, and you can see there is some done to the hull and some to the rigging, and also some to the crew, because she lost a gun or some guns, and then also losing gun crews. So there is crew damage. So you're losing crew, and if you want to board, you would have less crew to work with. And also eventually you see there's a stat written above the HVN there on the Chesapeake. It's called sail. That's how many they need, how many sailors they need to actually sail the ship. So if you get below that value, it's going to get really hard to sail the ship. You also see there on turn 6 is the rudder hit. There was actually even earlier rudder hit, but we just forgot to roll it correctly. But Björn was that unlucky that he actually rolled 3 rudder crits during the battle. So, but just one that counted. And what happens if you have a rudder hit is that, except for you losing 2 surrender points, you also lose some of your maneuverability, and you cannot tack. And that's a really big disadvantage, right? You can no longer beat and then tack through the wind. You're going to have to wearing all the time because your rudder is broken. So that's a real disadvantage, except for the fact that you also lose half your turning point. So that's why after turn 6, the Shannon loses a little bit its ability to maneuver in this battle, because so it's going a little bit more straight. And we talked about it after that. Probably what Marcus should have done with the Chesapeake is use that more. So try to make more turns. But I guess he was also, his fangs were out and he wanted to fight. You also see they lost a lot of guns here. You see the port side and the starboard side. There is a lot of 18-pounders lost. Of course, those are the bigger guns. So if you look up on the Shannon, you see there is a 1 to 58 is 18-pounder. So and then 59 to 91 is a 32-pounder carronade, and then 92 to 100 is a 9-pounder on a broadside. So there's quite a big chance that you'll be losing one of those larger guns once you hit that GDN number. So there was a lot of those for both ships lost on both sides, since they were fighting both sides, and also a bunch of carronades. So at the end, their broadside was very much weakened. They had much less crew, but they also had much less guns to fire, so it kind of worked out even at the end. Also, the Shannon did initially have had slightly more speed. And speed also lends itself to maneuverability. So, because each turn point you make, you lose 1.5 centimeters of movement. So the more centimeters of movement you have initially, the more you can turn, right? So, and also she had 1 turning point more than the Chesapeake initially. So maybe initially it's easy to be smart after the fact, right? But maybe Björn should have maybe turned some more initially, and then once the rudder was lost, maybe Marcus should have turned some more. In the end, I think they played it really nicely, both of them. It was a great fun to watch it. No sails were lost. Since they didn't fire specifically, even if there was damage to the rigging and the sails, there was no sails lost specifically, and actually also no masts then. A lot of damage to the hull, especially for that one really close broadside where they both got pretty close and fired at the same time. That was the most effective broadside they had, and they both hit pretty hard there. And they also had still, since that was in turn 6, they still retained quite a bit of their broadside weight. So hitting pretty hard. So an example, short example of how a fight could work using B2 quarter rule set when you're using slightly larger ships. We've played it with the really small ships, like the cutter there in our first test, and the small Spanish brig. And then for the next one, we did the slightly larger frigates. We did a Tartar, which is a 6th rate against the Spanish smaller 5th rate, and those also had, even if they had more mass, they were a little bit earlier frigates, and also with a much slighter broadside, no carronades, and like for instance Tartar having a 9-pounder broadside. So in very large difference between 18-pounders and 9-pounders in this game, since individual guns are counted in your broadside, right? So an 18-pounder have the potential of doing the double amount of damage, and also has more range, so it will hit harder at longer ranges than a 9-pounder. I think, again, the more I play this rule set, the more I like it. We did small tweaks, and I also talked to Barry, who wrote the rules, and we've implemented some of the things that he wanted changed, but also put some stuff in there ourselves, as we always do. And I mean, so far it plays out great. We've tried a boarding. We did that in the last battle. In this battle was a straight up gun duel with heavier frigates, and a lot of fun. Plays out super nice. Can only just totally recommend you guys try it. I know it's hard to get. Could only hope that Barry decides maybe to re-release it in some kind of digital form, so you guys can get a hold of it, because it is a lot of fun. It's the best system of all the ones I've read and the few ones I've tried. This is the one I like the most. I also, as I usually say, I do like Black Seas. When we had a battle with the Essex a while back, you can find that video here on the channel as well, using Black Seas rule set. And that was also a lot of fun. And it's also a little bit quicker, especially for larger engagements. I would use the Black Seas rule set. But for definition, beat to quarters is my go-to. So that is all for this one. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. I love subscribers. It's a, I mean, you know, you make videos, you're not making them completely for yourself, right? I'm making this because I found that some of you guys enjoy this stuff together with me, and I really enjoy the feedback I get from you guys, and the questions and so on. I love to spread my love of the hobby and so on. So I hope I see you guys for the next one.